Someone has told you this before, maybe more than once. Maybe so many times you've started to believe it. You think too much, as if thinking was something you could measure by volume, as if there were a correct amount, and you consistently exceeded it. You've tried to stop. It works for a few minutes. Then your mind comes back, not because something is broken, but because it doesn't know how to be anything else. But what if the problem was never that you think too much? What if you've been using the wrong word for what's actually happening inside your head? In the 1960s, a Polish psychiatrist named Kazimierz Dabrowski studied something mainstream psychology had been misreading for decades. He found that certain people didn't just experience the world, they amplified it, more intensely, more dimensionally, more simultaneously. He called this overexcitability, not a disorder, not a failure of regulation, a nervous system calibrated to process more, intellectually, emotionally, imaginatively, sensorially, psychomotorically. 5 channels, all running at a higher intensity than most environments were built to hold. The world looks at someone like you and sees anxiety, indecision, someone who can't just let things go. Dabrowski looked at the same person and saw something entirely different. He called it the raw material of development, the texture of a mind built to go further, and he had a name for what happens when a mind that carries this much starts to crack under the weight, when old frameworks break down before new ones are built. He called it positive disintegration, not a failure, the very mechanism of growth. What you've been told is too much is not a defect, it is a calibration. Here's what that calibration looks like from the inside. Your brain doesn't just process information. It detects patterns, connections between things most people never notice, not because they lack intelligence, but because their nervous system wasn't wired to catch what yours does automatically. Neuroscientists call this the default mode network, the circuitry that activates when you're supposedly at rest, except yours isn't resting, it's running simulations, revisiting yesterday's conversation to find what you missed, building probabilistic models of how tomorrow might unfold, solving problems that haven't happened yet, just in case. Before a single word is spoken in an important conversation, you've already run 5 versions of it in your head, mapped the possible tones, tracked the silences between sentences, anticipated the reactions. This isn't anxiety, this is preparation, running at a frequency most people simply don't experience. And there's something else the world consistently misreads as a flaw. When you genuinely don't know something, you say so, not as weakness, as precision. You've seen enough of the map to recognize where the edges blur, and you refuse to perform certainty you don't feel. Most people think intelligence is about having answers. It's almost always about having better questions. The world calls this overthinking. What it's actually describing is a mind honest enough to sit with complexity, and honest enough not to compress it into something smaller than it is. If what you've heard so far already feels uncomfortably familiar, subscribe to Quiet Psychology, because what comes next is the part most people never talk about. And it needs to be said. The things that matter most to you are often the hardest to begin. Not because you're avoiding them, because you can already see every way they might fail, before the first word is written, before the first step is taken. Your mind has already calculated the distance between what you're capable of imagining and what your hands can actually produce. That gap is real, and it's paralyzing, precisely because you care. Someone once put it this way: I never get started because the things I want to do are too important. That's not procrastination. That's complexity awareness. A mind so attuned to the weight of something that beginning feels like risking the whole thing. And then there's something quieter. You see a pattern forming. You name it, point it out. The room doesn't see it. 3 weeks later, it happens, exactly as you described, and no one connects the dots back. Over time, you stop pointing. You calibrate yourself downward, reduce your resolution to fit the space, and a significant part of who you are never quite enters the room at all. Do this long enough, and something shifts inside. You begin to doubt your own perception, not because you were wrong, but because you were alone in being right. The doubt doesn't come from imprecision. It comes from the silence that follows every unconfirmed observation. That sustained isolation, seeing what others can't, pointing it out, being dismissed, adjusting, starts to feel like gaslighting, even when no one intended it. This is the exhaustion no one accounts for, not sleep deprivation, something slower, with no clear origin. It builds from crossing, multiple times a day, the line between reflection and rumination. Reflection has direction. It moves towards something, understanding, clarity, a decision. Rumination loops, same thought, same weight, same exit that isn't there. But now, a different question entirely. Not everyone who thinks too much was built this way. Some learned it. In homes where silence meant something was about to happen. Where reading the room wasn't personality, it was survival. Where anticipating every outcome wasn't depth, it was defense. Hypervigilance looks identical to deep thinking from the outside. The pattern recognition is real, the anticipation is real, the constant processing is real, but the engine isn't curiosity, it's fear. A mind trained on threat detection doesn't stop scanning because the threat is gone. It scans because scanning was what kept it safe. And it continues, long after the danger has left, because no one ever told it the war was over. From the outside, both look the same. A person who thinks about everything, all the time. From the inside, one is exploring, the other is surviving. Do you think too much because your mind was built to go deeper, or because it was never safe enough to stop? That question isn't here to give you a diagnosis. It's here to offer something more useful, a direction. Because whether your mind runs deep because of how it's wired, or because of what it learned to survive, the path forward doesn't begin with thinking less. It begins with understanding what the thinking is doing. When your thoughts have direction, when they move toward something real, toward clarity, toward a decision you can actually hold, that's reflection. It might feel uncomfortable. It might take longer than you'd like, but it goes somewhere. When your thoughts loop, revisiting the same moment without progress, simulating futures to protect against threats that have already passed, that's a system that hasn't been told it can rest. You can't outthink your way out of this, but you can learn to notice the difference. And noticing, naming it the moment the mind shifts from exploring to orbiting, is where things begin to change. You don't need to think less. You need to know which kind of thinking you're doing, and give yourself permission to put down the kind that was never yours to carry. If someone you love seems to live inside their own head, don't tell them to stop. Ask them what they're seeing, because the answer is usually something the rest of the room missed entirely, and it might be the most important thing anyone has said all day. And if you are this person, the next time someone tells you that you think too much, remember, they're not describing your problem, they're describing their limit. You've been adjusting your frequency to match theirs for long enough. Most minds are radios tuned to a few clear stations. The signal comes in clean. They hear what's meant to be heard, and the rest is filtered out. Yours picks up everything. The main signal, the static between stations, frequencies that most receivers weren't built to detect, the tension no one admitted, the pattern that formed weeks before anyone else noticed, the feeling that something is slightly off before anyone can name what. This isn't interference, it's range. But range in a world full of noise means you also carry what others are spared from hearing. The unspoken, the unacknowledged, the things the room decided not to see. And that has weight. The answer was never to reduce your range. It was to learn which frequencies are signal and which are static you were never meant to carry alone. You don't think too much. You think at a frequency the room wasn't built for.